Good afternoon, everybody. You are listening to and watching Go Beyond. My name is Alyssa Robinson, and I am here today with Reverend Daniel Humbert. And basically, what Go Beyond is we go live on Facebook, on our website, on our streaming apps on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays to dig deeper into the message that we heard on Sunday. I really missed y'all on Monday. Thank you for all of the well wishes. I'm feeling a lot better. I've got my energy back. So I'm really excited to be with you today because we have some tough conversations ahead of us. This week, this entire month, we are in the book of Acts. And so I really want to encourage you to read the book of Acts. But this week specifically, we were looking at Acts chapter 2. And Acts chapter 2 talks a lot about communal living, and it sets the stage for what the church is trying to be and what they were meant to be at the time that the first Christian church was being set up. And one of the things that was really striking to me is that it talks about people from all ethnicities, races, backgrounds coming together and learning how to live together. And then it struck me as I was listening to Daniel's sermon on Sunday that Sunday morning is the most segregated time of the week. And if we are to follow the lead of the Church of Acts, that sits heavy on me of why are we so segregated on Sunday mornings? And so my first question to you, Daniel, is what are we supposed to do about this? Is this something that we have a responsibility to rectify, or is this something that is natural? What do we have going on here?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got a little bit of everything you just described. In some ways, it is natural, but it's not natural. And what I mean by that is it's natural in that it is the normal human condition to sort of flock together with people that are like me in some way or fashion. And so to that degree, it is normal. But to the degree that it's not biblical and gospel claim, that's where we fall short. And it is still true in the year 2020 that the hour of worship on Sunday is still the most segregated hour. And here's what I believe about that. I mean, a couple of things. One is the book of Acts is a phenomenal model for us to remind us that the church in its infancy was extremely diverse. Chapter 2 describes that, as you already mentioned, but even Acts chapter 11, Acts chapter 13, Acts chapter 16 begins to show, excuse me, that the church, the infant church, the new church after Christ, was very diverse. When you look at Acts chapter 13, it talks about the church at Antioch, and it literally in the very first verse of chapter 13 describes a very ethnically different and unique church that had come together, and they found great unity in that, and they celebrated that. So the first organized church at Antioch is very diverse. The other thing we learn, as you pointed out in Acts chapter 2, is that when people live together communally, as it's described there in Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 4, it helps us to better understand those differences and to celebrate those distinctions, not to sort of wash them away or to ignore them or deny them or somehow gloss past them, but rather say, to acknowledge, hey, I love how you do this, and I cherish the way you do that, and I wonder why you do this that way, right? And so it's just an acknowledgement of all that and a celebration of all that. And I would just say it would be my goal, and has long been my goal, to make every church I serve much more ethnically and racially diverse. I've had one great success story with regard to that, and some other much less successful stories. The church that I served in DeSoto was a much smaller church than Trietsch. We probably worshiped about 220 or so on a Sunday morning, so it's pretty small. But when I arrived there were 2 African-American families, and everybody else was Anglo. In a matter of 4 years, 4 very quick years, by the time I left, the average worshiping congregation had 40% African Americans, 5% Hispanic, and 55% Anglo. And while that's not a perfect match, it was highly representative of that community at the time. I'm not as familiar with DeSoto anymore. But the way we did that was based in relationship, just as Acts tells us. And what I mean by that is, if I don't know African Americans or Hispanics or Asians, and I don't have relationships with them as an Anglo, I can't invite them to church. I can't invite them to experience something that I'd like them to experience. But if I have friends that are ethnically diverse from me, then I invite them. I share my life with them just like they share their life with me. And so relationship is critical. And so one of the ways we all, as Anglos in particular, need to work on this is to develop relationships with people who are different from us. And that can happen on any number of levels. One of the things I'm so pleased with Trietsch about over the last 3 years or so is we began this dialogue with one of our sister churches down the street, and it's helped us now develop both personal relationships and church relationships, where we now literally have conversations regularly throughout the week. We dine together periodically. We have these encounters that just help us to know one another better. And I believe over time, those relationships help us then to determine, man, I'd like to worship with you, or I'd like to do faith together with you. I think that's a clarion call for us, both from the book of Acts and from Jesus's message to love all people. And we have been falling short, and we need to do something about it. So my hope is, even through the tragedies of these last 3 weeks that have only highlighted what has been an ongoing huge problem in this country, maybe it helps us to claim that for ourselves. So that's my hope.
So you talked a lot about communal living, and is the book of Acts calling for us to live communally? And what does that look like for us today? Because a lot of people would say that's communism, that's socialism, and that those are bad words around here.
Yeah.
How do we retrain ourselves to step away from individualized living? Is that what it's calling us to do?
Yeah, I do believe it's calling us to do that. And it's clear that, and again, in Acts chapter 2 and in Acts chapter 4, they describe communal living. And that scares us in the 20th century. There's no way else to describe that. That scares us, not just in America, but in many parts of the world where communal living just seems scary, because I have to share everything. I have to share not only my stuff, but I have to share my space, I have to share my time, I have to share my concepts of reality and relationship. And so it's scary. And I think we just need to own that. It's scary, it's different, it's not the typical. We have pockets of that communal living based in Christianity across our country. They're small pockets. I think I mentioned Monday that one of our former pastors, he and his wife lived communally for a year with other groups of people. They spoke very highly of that. It helped their faith very much. And so there's no doubt that the early church felt that that was needful. But it's also clear that it pretty quickly dissipated. And I don't doubt, because it's the human condition of, I want my stuff, I want my way, I want to live the way I want to live. And so, golly, by the 2nd century, that's already changing. And so this is nothing new in the 21st century that we don't want to live together. But I do think the thing that we can bring together more clearly in the 21st century is the concept of communal living. Basically, at its core, is really just about, how do I share life with you? And that might be quarters, that might be living arrangements, but it might also be, how do I share my values and my way of being and my worldview and my understanding of life? How can we learn to share that together? And I hope we would all agree that whether we're literally living together or not physically, that we can find ways to do that, right? Again, that goes back to relationships. So I just need to intentionally engage with people that, in this case, might have the Christian faith as a common value, and then find ways that our differences, whatever they may be, whether it's on sexuality or race or politics or the ecology or economy or whatever, that we find ways to dialogue around that we find ways to cherish one another's differences. That goes back to your first question. And I think that's the point that the early church was trying to make, was, when I rely on you literally for my food or my clothes or my lodging, and you rely on me, man, we can't help but cherish one another, honor one another, value one another. And to me, that's the takeaway in the 21st century is, if I'm not going to live communally as this describes, then let me find other ways to cherish you and value you and honor you. That's what I would take away from it.
Well, and my last question is probably the hardest question, and it kind of combines the two ideas that we've been talking through about diversity and communal living and what we're supposed to do with that. So, with the recent events of so much, and not even recent, for the ongoing centuries long events of violence against the African American community and culture in the United States, there has been an uprising in the last few weeks, rallying around Black Lives Matter. Now, you've challenged us to, in the sermon last week, to live generously into the fruits of the Spirit, and to constantly give to others and put others first and think about the needs of others. But one of the things that was really disappointing to me when people rose up to Black Lives Matter was the response, all lives matter. And what was most disappointing is that it felt like it was mostly coming from the Christian community, correcting people and saying, no, all lives matter. And when I hear somebody say that, what I'm hearing is, yeah, but what about me? What about my people? What about other people? Like, yeah, Black lives matter, but disabled lives matter. These police officers' lives matter. All of these other people's lives matter. Are you saying they don't matter? And it's frustrating to me. And so what I want to know is, how do we respond to the what about me mentality? How do we respond to all lives matter?
Well, number one, that's a deep and broad subject, right? And so we can choose to go very directly and talk in micro language, if you will, which is Black Lives Matter is real, but it is also a slogan. And what it meant from the beginning and still means today is Black Lives Matter too, right? A slogan can't use a whole bunch of words. A slogan has to have a concentrated effort. And what's clearly connoted in Black Lives Matter is our lives, meaning Black lives, our lives matter too, not to the exclusion of everybody else, not to the disdain of anybody else, but golly, folks, we've been taking it on the chin here for centuries now. And can we at least acknowledge that our lives matter too? And so Black Lives Matter has this clear, and ever since I've known it, literally means our lives matter too. Don't deny us, don't ignore us. It does not mean to the exclusion of others. That's the micro level. On the macro level, I hope we could all agree that clearly all lives matter, right? I mean, certainly that's true. But when people are in great despair and in great trouble and in great distress, as African Americans have been in this country, to say all lives matter as a response back is literally like slapping somebody in the face. It's literally like saying, you really don't matter. And let me just acknowledge that that's true by telling you all lives matter, right? And so, I mean, we've got examples of this in scripture. Jesus, tells a parable about 99 sheep and one gets lost and goes kind of on its own and is in distress. And what does Jesus say? He doesn't say all lives matter, but he does give his full attention, the shepherd goes and finds that one sheep, not to the detriment of the other 99, not to the lack of love and care for the other 99, but because that sheep is in distress and that sheep needs help, right? And so that's a biblical example. I mean, another example is the Beatitudes, when Jesus gives this litany of blessed are the poor, and blessed are those who are meek, and blessed are those who, hunger and thirst for righteousness. And the litany goes on. Jesus is not saying any of those to the detriment of anybody else. He's just saying that those people are specially connected and in special deserving of blessedness, right? And so the gospel gives us several instances where this is true. I think there are other ways to say it. When I have two children. Many families have more than two children. If one of my children is in despair, they've had an accident or they're hurt, and I go and embrace them or take them to get physical care, it's not to the detriment of my other child, or in other cases, two or three other. It's not that I don't love those other two or three. Clearly, I love all of my children, but that child is in hurt and in need of help. And so I give special, direct, clear, overt attention to that child who is hurting. And so there's all kinds of examples where we just acknowledge that it's all right to say and to acknowledge and to help Black lives because they are clearly in a heightened sense of distress. So to me, the gospel is real clear about that. And I also believe that the Acts passage in Acts chapter 2 and again in Acts chapter 4, this communal living points that out. All lives do matter, but in the moments and in the eras when certain lives are in great distress, we've got to take care of them, and we've got to own and acknowledge that they matter too. So that's how I would see that. But
Well, and I'm going to put you on the spot again, because that is such great information and heartfelt information from you on what scripture says about this and what Jesus says about this and how we can live into our faith and our calling. But how do we respond when somebody, because the way that you so eloquently explained that, I don't know if I have the capacity to do. Maybe people who are watching feel like they don't have the capacity to explain that in such a way. Do you have any tips for how we can respond when somebody says something to us like that we disagree with?
Well, everybody's different, right? And so how we respond needs to come from the genuineness of who we are. And so I will only express, by inclination, tend to want to rise up and lash out because I think you, sorry son of a gun, you don't know what you're talking about, or you're so ungracious and unloving and uncaring. That's my natural inclination. So what I have to do is I have to pause, and I literally have to breathe in, and I literally have to say a brief prayer, as in, Lord, help me. We call that a breath prayer. Lord, help me. And all of that is designed as the one in me who wants things to be right on the Enneagram, that I've got to stop, think, and then process, and then try to say something. Otherwise, I'm going to say something that's hurtful, spiteful, and not healthy, whether in terms of faith or in terms of psychology. So my only recommendation is, number one, respond out of your genuine desire to help someone, and respond in such a way that helps either educate or enlighten somebody about the realities of Black Lives Matter. So again, back to the micro level, I would simply say, listen, Black Lives Matter too is what that means. And therefore, can you not simply acknowledge that Black Lives Matter too and just say that? Maybe if you could just say Black Lives Matter too, if you need to add the TOO on there, add the TOO on there. But I think we've got to have these conversations, even as hard and as stress-filled as they are. We've got to speak into it. And I own my own inability to do that when the Black Lives Matter matters arose about 5 years ago. I was unable to do it because I couldn't speak well into it. And so, to my shame, I didn't speak into it well then. But I'm challenging myself and others to step up and speak into it now.
Well, thank you so much. I think that's all we have time for today. And it was really good. And I know that I asked really tough questions today. So thank you for taking the time to dig in with me. Don't forget to join us again, everybody, on Friday at 12:30, where we are going to explore a spiritual practice together. I don't know what it is. Daniel, do you know what it is?
I don't know what it is yet either. I'm struggling with which one would be most appropriate. So we will know that come Friday.
So it'll be a surprise. Tune in with us on Friday to learn what spiritual practice we're walking through together. And as always, you can catch all previous episodes of Go Beyond at tmumc.org/go beyond. See you then.